In this video, I'm going to replace the stock shocks on my Jansno electric bike with these aftermarket shocks. These aftermarket shocks are air-filled and they're adjustable for rider's weight and riding style. Now, I'm going to go through step by step on how to install that, but before we get started, a link to this product is below and also above. I hope that you like this video, subscribe to my channel, and let's get after the install. In this segment, we're going to replace the factory front fork, which is not adjustable, to this fully adjustable air fork. I have the bike propped up on these sawhorses with this 2x4 running through so I can easily remove the front wheel and the front fork. And then I'm going to be removing the handlebars and stem. I'm going to reuse the stem and handlebars if possible. So let's get started on the uninstalling of the components. Now what you want to do is be careful with the handlebars. Let them hang down a little bit, especially since I have the hydraulic brakes. Now see how the spacing is? There is 4 spacers on the top. They're all the same size. This top crown should come off. Might have to tap that. Well, that's not what you want to do, but I did get it off because I want to retain all these pieces here. You can see there's a race and a rubber sleeve, and you can see there's ball bearings on the top and the bottom. And now the fork will slide right out like that. All right, the fork slid right out. You could see the races here. I want to retain this original hardware, and I want to match this up with the new fork. We have the original fork removed. This is the aftermarket air fork. It is much lighter, I'd say at least a pound lighter. But one thing that's obvious is the stem tube is a lot taller. You can see here, it looks to be about 3 to 4 inches taller, or 100 millimeters. And what I'm going to do here is there's 2 solutions to this. You can get a stem extension piece like this. This is probably the cheapest option. The other option is install this fork and then put taller handlebars like a BMX style on there. So that's one solution that you can do. Now, one of the things that I wish this fork, I could remove the old crown, then I could slide this new fork up into, but they welded the bottom crown to the outside shocks, which is not an ideal situation, but for most budget e-bikes, they come with the welded bottom crown, so it makes it a lot more difficult. So I have this ready to go. What I need to do is I need to install the race on the neck here. I also have to put in this star nut. You see the star nut? It gets swaged down into the stem tube. Now, they make a tool to do that. You simply thread this star nut on to the driver like this. Then that gets put on. There's a sleeve here as acts as a guide. And then I simply tap that to drive the star nut in there. I'll leave a link to a video above that you can make your own star nut driver using a socket. I've done that, although it's a little more cumbersome, but it is doable. I've done it both ways, but this tool definitely helps. I have a link to this along with this stem cap extension piece. So I'm going to go ahead and get that driven down, and I'm also going to put the race on the bottom here. All right, I got my race installed. Now it's time to install the star nut, and I'm going to use this swage piece, and then I'm going to need a hammer. I don't want to swage it too far down. A little bit further. I got it swaged down in there. Now I'm going to remove it. I got it about 5 to 6 millimeters down in there. You can see it here. Here's the moment of truth. I have the bottom crown with the steering tube. I have that race seated on the bottom here. I'm going to install this plastic sleeve and the ball bearings that came with the factory fork. And I'm going to slide this up in here. And then what I'm going to do is put this plastic sleeve on. There's a little metal conic that goes down and interfaces. Then there's a plastic conic piece that goes on like that. Now I'm going to put this cap piece on, then the crown, but that doesn't leave much room for this. That's not ideal. Not sure what I'm going to do. I can't just put the crown right on here because it pinches. I'm going to have to use the small spacer to get that everything seated, then put that on the crown, the top crown, then the handlebar extension piece, and put 3 spacers on to ensure the handlebar stem can seat properly. Bring the handlebars up, make sure that your cables are routed properly. You can see there's a little bit of a space between the top of the cap and the steering tube. Then I'm going to use this long bolt. You can use the new cap or the factory cap, and then tighten this down. I'm going to get all of this as lined up as best I can. I'm going to tighten this down, and you're going to feel it all compress. I'm not going to over tighten it too much right now, so that I can kind of monkey with it and align it as I put the crown on. But you can see this is how it's going to turn. Once I tighten all these other bolts down, everything will work properly. But in the meantime, I'm just going to leave that the way it is. And then I'm now going to install the suspension like that. All right, time to insert the air fork onto the crown. You could utilize these foam pieces if you want. You could cut them down because this distance is a little bit shorter and you have these little bumpers. So remember to remove the bumpers, and they have to go back on once you slide the fork up in here. I'm going to slide on my bumpers. This protects the fork from hitting the frame. Get this to engage. There we go. And what you want to do is bring up this adjustable piece just past the top of the crown, and then the other side just past the top of the crown like this. And you can slide them around so that the logos match up if you want. That's what I'm doing, so they face me while I'm riding. Get my rubber stoppers turned around. Well, I could do that after. What I like to do is put those rubber stoppers down and kind of hold the fork in place while I go and tighten it using the 6 millimeter. Come over here and then just tighten these bolts down. Not quite yet with the bottom. Let's just leave the bottom to hang out. I want to tighten this steering tube. You don't want any play in the steering tube or it will jiggle and then wear the races and bearings out. So you want the steering tube to be nice and tight so that it doesn't wear out the races. But everything looks pretty good and aligned. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up these various bolts on the side here. First, I'm going to tighten up the stem tube bolt that drives down, and then I'm going to go here and tighten up all these side bolts, and then last I'm going to tighten this up. That way everything moves freely. Now to reinstall everything, you could take this plastic guard off here. I'm going to route the brake. What I'm going to do here is, it's kind of neat. It has this brake cable retention here on the front of the fork, but I'm going to turn this like that so I can mount this. Looks like it is an axial mount, so I need to take off the bracket. Now I'm just taking the bracket off. I'm going to maintain the same washers. Now just leave this finger tight so that you can adjust it once you put the wheel on. Might even be better to put the wheel on than this, actually. Bringing up the wheel now. Obviously, make sure the brake rotor is on this side. Got the proper spacers. You don't even need these tab washers. These don't even pertain to this axle. So I'm going to go ahead, turn that on. On the other side, I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, I got that secured. Now I'm going to go over here and adjust the brake. All right, I rerouted the brake cable to the outside. I use this connection here and tighten it down. The brake is loose, just a smidge, about finger tight. And what I'm going to do is, to get that centered, the best thing you can do is depress the brake. Then, as it's floating freely in and out, it centers on the brake rotor, and then tighten the bolts down. This allows or prevents it from rubbing. Got that tightened. It's centered on the rotor. And there we go. If I lift this up, still a little adjustment, but I'll go ahead and adjust that. Installing the fender, just simply slide it in here. And this fender is a little bit wider with the attachment point, so you may need to adjust this just a little bit. Bent those out a little bit with the pliers. Slide that on there. Then what I'm going to do is start this bolt in here. Get that to slide through. This fender was a little bit tricky. I had to use a pair of pliers and bend the tabs and hold the tabs with this, and then get that bolt on there. Once I got the bolt started or nut on the back, then I was able to get that tightened down, and then I just simply bend it in position. To reinstall the headlamp, make sure this little bar piece is down. You have this rubber piece that goes on the outside to give some friction so it doesn't continue to slide down. I'm going to take this tab and slide it in the furthest outboard. I'm going to first get this on here. I'm going to make sure that it's down here along the rubber bumpers so it can't slide down anymore. And then clip this metal piece in here. Then I'm going to go ahead and put my screw back on just like it was when I took it off. Go ahead and put that on finger tight, and then I'll come over here and I'll put that rubber piece on there, and then the inside bracket. Make sure it goes on there like that, and then put the screw in. Now the cables. The orange is easy because that goes to the headlight and the horn. That one's really easy to do. Now the red ones, I didn't mark, I probably should have. One's for the right directional, one's for the left. 50-50 chance. I'll put the battery in and check it, but I may have to reverse these if they're backwards. But all right, looks good. Go ahead and take this bike down. Now I do need to put some air potentially into the air shock. And to do so, you just simply remove this cap and use a air shock pump. Now this is very different from the tire pump because it's higher pressure, and it probably needs to be about 150 psi. All right, here is my shock pump. I'm gonna screw this on here. It's set to 150 psi or 10 bar. Feels stiff, so I'm going to take the pressure down a little bit to about 130 and see how that does. I'm also going to check the shock here. This is where you really want to dial it in. It always takes me about 2-3 times to get the pressures right. You simply tie this on here, get the pressures in the rear and front shock right. That way it's nice and comfortable. That seems a lot better. You can also see that this doesn't jiggle around because it's tightened on the top. That reminds me, I need to tighten these bottom ones here. So I forgot to do that. So let's go ahead and do that now. But I think I'm good to go as far as air pressure. Reinstall this. I'm going to tighten those bolts there. All right, got that tightened down. One thing I recommend, go out, take this for a ride, a little bit of off-road riding, and watch these. Because sometimes if you don't tighten this down too much, the shock will slide through the crowns and will start moving. So keep an eye on this exposure or the protrusion of this and make sure that it's the same when you come back after a ride. If it's not, then adjust it and tighten these bolts down again. In this segment, we're going to replace the stock shock, which is not adjustable, with this adjustable air fork. You're also going to need one of these shock pumps, and there is a valve on either end here that allows you to change the pressure based on the rider's weight and riding conditions. If you want a little more damp, obviously lower pressure. If you want a little more firm, then higher pressure. I'm going to start out with 100 psi on each of these chambers. I believe the operating pressure is anywhere from 200 to 60 is the bottom. So I'm sitting here at about 60 right now. So I'm going to pump that up to about 80. Go a little more. And now I'm going to do the bottom one also. Down here. Check this. And then I'll be able to install that. Everything bolts right on. Got about actually 90 psi on each chamber. So that'll give me a little better dampening ride. I can adjust that up and down once I get the shock installed. All right, put those caps on. To remove the shock, you're going to need two 5mm hex keys, and you're going to loosen the bolts. I'm going to push the sleeve out, wiggle this around. Not doing a too good job here. All right, now you can see the bike can move up and down. That's where the squeaking comes from. It barely moves, so I'm going to put a little bit of oil down in there to get this to move a little freely. You can see, no wonder why this shock doesn't work very well. The bolts are probably too tight there, and it's preventing it from moving as needed. The new one, I'm going to install the same way. You can see here, I'm going to use the original fasteners that came with the bike. But it's definitely a lot better ride than the stock one, which was rigid. After installing the new air shock, I noticed that the frame creaked at this pivot point. I removed the plastic caps from either side, and I noticed that there was a fastener that was over torqued. It's a 6mm hex. You can see it here. I loosened it up, and then I tightened it just a quarter turn past tight, and now the rear trailing arm moves freely, and the shock is fully adjustable, and it rides a lot better, and I no longer have that creak. The upgraded air shocks are a big improvement over the factory ones. It's a much more comfortable bike to ride. The front fork dampens the bumps off-road much better. The top crown is secured to the rest of the fork, and I don't get that wiggling. I hope that you like this video. Subscribe to my channel. If you have any questions, please leave in the comments. Thanks for watching, and happy trails.